Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Roseland Podcast. I'm your host, Roseland Perkins, and we're gonna do a quick reaction video. I'm gonna say this: the reason why I'm doing this reaction video, it's not because no, scratch that. I'm doing this reaction video because we and my audience, me and my audience, been having a conversation. Are Black Americans native to this land? Not native Indian, but native to this land. Most people will say yes. Some people will say no. Excuse me. But we're gonna watch a documentary, a quick, fast, 45-minute documentary. We might turn, to an hour and a half, maybe two. Um, show tonight. But before we start, how are y'all doing? I hope everybody's doing great. You know, my day was alright. I slept most of the day. I went grocery shopping and I slept most of the day. Also too, before we start, can you like and subscribe, and also hit the, if you're following me on X, you watching this on X, hit the follow button, or if you're watching this on the YouTube, hit the subscribe button. It helps a lot with my channel, and also comment and hit the like button so the algorithm can see that people do watch this. Give me a second. Okay, cool. So yeah, definitely hit the algorithm button. Also hit the go crazy in the live chat through X and YouTube. Everybody's gonna see it, so it's a good thing, and I will answer your questions. Other than that, let's start the video.
Who are you? You don't know. Don't tell me Negro, that's nothing. What were you before the white man named you a Negro? And where were you? And what did you have? What was yours? What language did you speak then? 20 million black people don't even know their own language. Why? Because he took it away from them. 20 million black people who don't even know the history of their ancestors. Why? Because he took it away from them. And if you try and tell them how thoroughly and completely they've been robbed, he says you're teaching hate. Dark people who have been oppressed and exploited by those who are not their own kind, strangers. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy. Aborigines, which means what? Black folks. You never find a white aborigine. Rather, aborigines are called natives, or they're always dark-skinned people. You and I are aborigines, but you don't like to be called an aborigine. You want to be called an American.
So I'm gonna say this. This is the first time I ever heard the word aborigine. That's super dope. So let's watch that again because I didn't know what he said. He said aborigine. If anybody ever heard that, just hit the live chat, and if you want to explain it, definitely you can explain it.
Which means what? Black folks. You never find a white aborigine. Rather, aborigines are called natives, or they're always dark-skinned people. You and I are Aborigine. But you don't like to be called an Aborigine. You want to be called an American. Aborigine actually means from the beginning. It's two Latin words. Ab meaning from, origine meaning the beginning. Ab meaning from, origine meaning the beginning. Ab meaning from, origine meaning the beginning. Ab meaning from, origine meaning the beginning.
Turn it up. Look, 100 years after 100 years, they lied to us about this and that. Told us all we from Africa. I made fiction characters turn into facts. Heard you tell me then it was not.
Yo, my man Dave
My wife and I wrote a book about it. It's a book with knowledge, evidence, and fact. And my other book.
Well, the Callaways did actually good with this. No, I actually like
in the background, showing my people where they post love. Showing my people where they get it from, where they hit it from, all sorts of angles. When it comes to this research, you must please first, don't trust strangers. Find out all on your own is what I highly recommend and suggest. And if you looking for answers and content about me, I highly recommend you the best. Which is my website at the link you see just across the screen. Don't let it miss you. I make it simple. I double down on that black and white. It's so official. Now, in today's society of America, millions of so-called African Americans are struggling to come to grips with their true identity, culture, heritage, and history, mainly due to the numerous manipulative tactics utilized to govern their critical thinking mechanisms and to also decimate their literacy capabilities. Each one of these manipulative social engineering experiments can only be detected and detached from one's subconscious when standing outside of the box. I'll let you ponder on what's happening to those that are still inside of it. Meanwhile, you have not and will not ever hear me promote any form of religion throughout any of my content that I present to the public. Reason being is due to religion, faith, and beliefs being based on one's personal relationships. And I am not here to debate nor argue about who you should or should not love. That's simply none of my business. So let's also be sure to not confuse the truth that I present throughout my content with any personal beliefs that you may have. Now in this segment, you will learn about who you truly are and where you really came from based on truthful information. Because mind you, there is a big difference between truth and facts. Facts are merely controversial information, whereas a person bears the opinion to debate its credibility or not. That's yet another form of belief. Whereas the truth is non-debatable due to its credibility of always making logical sense. This is why in today's society, most people don't even care about the truth. Why? Well, because to them, unfortunately, a lie is more entertaining. So now let's start with March 1st, 1790, when then President George Washington and Vice President John Adams, along with Speaker of the House Frederick Muhlenberg, signed the 1790 Census Act. According to the census itself, it states that the 1790 Census Act is a law that, quote, required that every household be visited, that completed census schedules be posted in two of the most public places within each jurisdiction, there to remain for the inspection of all concerned, and that the aggregate amount of each description of persons for every district be transmitted to the president. So let me point out that some households, not all, were visited by these individuals entitled as census enumerators, also known as census takers. who are technically federal government unsupervised employees, who allegedly went from town to town, city to city, and door to door, deciding who was of what race, and then documented the family they meet as such. So you mean to tell me that these census takers were provided instructions by way of the government to document and record the ethnic category of various family members based on their perception of the family when they visited? And their opinions were considered to be official historical records of information? Even though they did not count every individual living within the United States due to the multiple indigenous Niji raids and rebellions occurring during this time period, the alleged first official census of the entire United States was implemented on a day dubbed as Census Day on August 2nd, 1790. See, now, what's very important to note here is that the quote, free people of color were recorded all in one group. And also note that it states free and not freed, as if they were freed people from some form of enslavement. I go into more detail about the census labels in the documentary that I'll link above right now. But I said all of that for a particular reason, and that is, the official 1790 U.S. Census population count was a total of 3,929,214 people. But keep in mind that this total amount did not reflect millions of people who were indigenous to North America, aka Turtle Island, meaning they did not come from another continent, nor did it reflect the accurate total amount of so-called slaves in North America. Why? Well, the U.S. Census Agency themselves admitted to not possessing the majority of their official historical records of information that was allegedly documented between the 1790 U.S. Census and all the way up to the 1830 U.S. Census. And their excuse was to claim that these records were lost or destroyed somehow. See, this was all purposely done for two reasons. A, to hide the truth about the real history surrounding the U.S. and slavery. I mean, generally speaking, you can literally prove to yourself that your ancestors were slaves or not by documentation. You can check and see if your ancestors came off a boat. I've been sharing this information publicly for years now, along with my sources. And I still have not heard from anyone that used my instructions to trace their family that I have available on Amazon Prime and anywhere else books are sold, that one of their ancestors were documented as being a former slave. The people that reached out to me that has or is currently undergoing research on their family's history have not failed with discovering that their family members were either never enslaved and has always been free, or worked as an indentured servant for money, land ownership, business ownership, etc., and considered to be freedmen once their obligations of servitude expired. Make no mistake, when you hear the term freedman from now on, freedman does not necessarily mean that he or she was freed from enslavement, because it can also mean relieved from their duties in most commonly known cases. So this first reason to allegedly lose or destroy these records was to hide the truth that it was a very small amount of copper-colored slaves and a greater amount of prisoners of war in North America. And the second reason is B, to hide the truth about who are the real minority and majority in terms of the population count here in the United States of America. In which this brings me to my very next point. The biggest portion of their agenda was the abominable sabotaging of the indigenous Niji's history, legacy, languages, culture, and heritage systematically. So of course they couldn't pull this task off on their own. So they implemented a methodology format based solely on the scientific concepts of eugenics. According to the National Archives, the term eugenics was coined by a British natural scientist and explorer named Francis Galton in the year of 1883. Now, there are two sides to every coin, so I'll be sure to flip each side over, and I'm not theoretically speaking here. Eugenics was implemented to help improve one selected group of people and their future generations to come, to overtake and oversee yet another set group of people and their future generations by way of extermination of their mindsets. This rabbit hole goes much deeper than one may assume. Allow me to simplify the explanation of this paramount method utilized by the likes of your industrialized institutions throughout America still to this very day. Eugenics literally changes everything that any person was ever taught of or even thought of previously before this selection was carried out upon him or her. According to Francis Galton himself, this system would allow, quote, more suitable races or strains of blood a better chance of prevailing speedily over the less suitable, end quote. Galton was heavily influenced by the likes of an English naturalist, biologist, and the first ever self-proclaimed documented bigoted genealogist, Charles Darwin.
That's crazy because, I'm going to say this. We only watched like 15 minutes of it without me speaking. I feel like we have to be careful with science. That's why I always tell people all the time, those 23andMe to find out what country you are from and all this other crazy shit and stuff. It's very dangerous. The reason why I always say it's very dangerous because you don't know why they need your DNA. You don't know why they tell you you're from Nigeria and Nigeria was created in 1914. And they got their independence in, I think, in the 1940s or the 1960s. So this is the things that we have to watch out for, definitely.
Single-handedly developed the controversial theory of human evolution, which was his belief that man came from monkeys, and then his system of natural selection, which included a heavy flux of racial derogatory.
Since 1859, that's when Charles Darwin introduced Origin of Species by natural selection and the favored human races. Did you know that today they only report half the title that Charles Darwin wrote? His title had to do with favored human races, assigning supremacy to the Aryan race, all others being inferior.
That's another good question. I mean, good thing he said, because you know why? We should be telling our own history. We don't need these other people telling our history, saying that we're from here, we're from that. When we say that we're from, this is our native land, this is our native land. We shouldn't have to explain, oh yeah, we're from Africa and da-da-da-da, because their parents or their forefathers had to flee their country to get, half the stuff that they have now, or even better. Or they just couldn't cut it in their country. So we got to be careful with stuff like that as well.
How many knew that?
So listen to what he just said again.
Wrote. His title had to do with favored human races, assigning supremacy to the Aryan race, all others being inferior. How many knew that? Only a handful. His book was racist, and that was the basic purpose for writing it.
During the early 1900s, the social engineering aspect of Darwin's theory became popular worldwide amongst many scientists alike, high-ranking politicians, and it even caught the eye of the elitists. More about this in the second installment concerning this topic. But I mention all of this to inform you that they played a prominent role in elevating the advancement of eugenics, specifically for the sake of their own race, disguised as if this was for the benefit of all humanity at a cost of whatever they desire. They were religiously following this formula or rule, dubbing it as survival of the fittest. In other words, Charles Darwin's theory of human evolution was merely a way to elevate and escalate the implementation of white supremacy and to eradicate those who were of non-pale complexions, deeming it as survival of the fittest, where those who did not meet their racist criteria, motives, and agendas would suffer from a variety of forms of propaganda that was hypothesized to eliminate the opposing race of people. Eugenics is literally a modernized pseudoscience that was based merely on racial discrimination and environmental injustice, socially, physically, and mentally, but became prosperous still due to its popularity of praises from those who gravitated towards inequality and racial estrangement. On the date of September 25th, 2008, in a statement made before the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs by Representative James P. Moran, on the grounds of the Thomasina E. Jordan Indian Tribes of Virginia Federal Recognition Act, Moran stated, quote, "This is a travesty that this committee can correct. The second unique circumstance for the Virginia tribes is what they experienced at the hands of the state government during the first half of the 20th century. It has been called a paper genocide. At a time when the federal government granted Native Americans the right to vote, Virginia's elected officials adopted racially hostile laws targeted at those classes of people who did not fit into the dominant white society. The fact that some of Virginia's ruling elite claimed to be blood descendants of Pocahontas, in their view, meant that no one else in Virginia can make a claim they were Native American and a descendant of Pocahontas's people. To do so would mean that Virginia's ruling elite were what they decreed all non-whites to be, part of the inferior Negroid race. With great hypocrisy, Virginia's ruling elite pushed politics that culminated with the enactment of the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. This act directed state officials and zealots like Walter Plecker to destroy state and local courthouse records and reclassify in Orwellian fashion all non-whites as colored. It targeted Native Americans with a vengeance, denying Native Americans in Virginia their identity. To call yourself a Native American in Virginia was to risk a jail sentence of up to 1 year, end quote. Now, in this statement, he used the term Native American, but the truth is that our identities were changed not from Native American, but from Indian to colored. And they were not only jailing people in Virginia for claiming their true identity, but they were also killing them by hanging them from a tree, and in more ways than one that I won't mention, in each state across North America. The biggest bigoted racist white supremacist of them all was none other than Walter Ashby Plecker.
The Plecker era was truly one of the darkest times for Native people in Virginia. But I think it's critical for us to think about what was the genesis of the ideology that Plecker was a proponent of. And it's really the eugenics movement. The eugenics movement was a pseudo-scientific movement. We say pseudo-scientific today because we find that the science that they were proposing is not what we today would honor as scientific in any way. The eugenics movement has a direct link to the descendants of Charles Darwin. They somehow made the leap to these notions about racial purity. What is best for each race is racial purity. Plecker and his friends convinced the Virginia legislature to adopt very restrictive legislation.
So the question y'all have to ask yourself now is why? Why do they do this to black people? Why do they, put black people in these terms? Instead of helping immigrants, why don't they help the black community? Why won't they give them a black community where they can strive? To me, my answer always been is that, we always smarter. We always know how to adapt. We always know how to get through things. They don't know how to get through things. White supremacy don't know how to get through things. That's why they always have the better education, the better jobs, the better opportunity of striving. We always have to go through some obstacles. And sometimes you have to see that. And I'm not just talking about black Americans. I'm just talking about black people in general that are Caribbeans that actually has to be like, okay, yeah, I'm black. There is zero logic, genetics, or economic evidence to prove black people are evidence. That's why we're watching this. Did you know black Americans were reclassified in Virginia in the 1800s? Oh, yeah.
In 1924, it's called the Racial Integrity Act. With this legislation, it was decreed that there were only two possible categories. One is white, which means a person you check that you're white if you have white ancestry, Caucasian ancestry, and absolutely nothing else. The other category is everybody else, and that's colored. So this was very hard on Virginia's indigenous community because in a sense it wipes away their identity on paper. Their ability to describe themselves as Indian was not possible. To describe themselves as Indian was not possible.
Keep in mind that our elder family members' birth certificates were changed multiple times to state colored, Negro, mulatto, and now black or African American as their classifications of racial identity by way of the federal government systematically.
My grandfather, my great-granddaddy said nigger. His said nigger. So, I believe this. If you ever see one of those old ones, yeah, you be like, yo, what the fuck? What's going on? What did I just walk into? Yeah, you'll feel like you walked into some type of like Twilight Zone or something.
So, the moral of this segment is that you have been lied to by your government, your president and politicians, your news media, your school teachers, college and university professors, your public school history curriculums, multiple out of Africa theory books, and even by the very people that share the same hue as you and I.
What's going on?
And that's
SP2,
a whole nother
man.
story
Shout out
within
to
itself. Now, I challenge each and every one of you to seriously research your mother or your grandmother or your great-grandmother's birth certificates right now. And if it has the letter C or COL dot or colored and every other misclassified title of race created by the government that I just mentioned, then at that moment, you will know the absolute truth about who you really are.
I've been around doing this for a long, long time. I don't always get it right, but I always take responsibility. When I get it wrong, I acknowledge I got it wrong. But my overarching objective, if we cannot make significant progress on racial equity This country is doomed. It is doomed, not just because of African Americans, but this country is doomed. It is doomed, not just because of African Americans, but because by 2040, this country is going to be minority white European. Hear me? Minority white European.
Those of you that say Black Lives Matter, I feel sorry for you. Do you really believe you have a black life? Do you want me to read to you the meaning of black? Who called you black? Shouldn't you have rejected that from the beginning? A contradiction, a bundle of contradiction. Black means the absence of color. Absence of color. Absence of good, absence of light, absence of direction. That's the meaning of black. Black is not a color, it is the absence of color. Don't you understand it? They keep laughing at you as you call yourself black. They keep laughing at you. Open any dictionary, find out the meaning of black, and tell me if you find anything good, and you are not black. You got to change it. The same way, Negro became a racial slur, black should be labeled a racial slur. When it is used in connection with you, black should be labeled a racial slur. When it is used in connection with you, black should be labeled a racial slur. When it is used in connection with you.
To watch all of my exclusive content not featured here on my channel, log on to my website at imjustheretomakeyoutthink.com/films. Throughout today's society of America, millions of so-called blacks or African Americans are settling for a complex description of their historical ethnicity based solely on the fictitious thoughts of particular strangers who were assigned with the responsibility of documenting a person's classification of race by the color of their skin in which they see, or their best personal opinion of what an individual should be generally racially classified as. These particular individuals were entitled as census enumerators, also known as census takers, or the U.S. Marshals, who are federally government unsupervised employees that was said to have allegedly gone from town to town, city to city, and door to door, deciding who was of what race, and then documented the families they meet as such. The Marshals, or the census enumerators, had and still has a mammoth amount of influence on genealogy records. In fact, what they informally documented on a sheet of paper was literally based on their individual opinions, and then later deemed as official records that were sacrosanct, leading to hundreds of years of whatever the census takers' ideas of race were officially credited as historical facts of information. So, in simpler terms, these census takers were provided strict instructions by the government to record the ethnic category of various family members based on their perception of the family when they visited. So if you are attempting to find and interpret data about your family's history, these results can be confusing, especially if in one census your family has been recorded under the category all other free persons or slaves, and then free persons of color, then mulatto, and even black. During the earlier years of census taking, there were no categories for Indian at all, while in later census records, Indians were recorded all in one categoric group known as free people of color. most census of today are mysteriously skipping the classification of race altogether, meaning that this particular portion of a birth certificate, for example, is purposely left blank, but only for people ranging from light to dark brown skin complexions. In part 1 of this segment, I shared congressional records uncommonly known by the public that details the truth about census records and why the choice of your family's classification of race was solely up to the individual census taker of that particular area and not your family members. The complexity of census records is in fact outrageously discombobulating, but still very utilitarian for research purposes and enthralling nonetheless. During the early half of the year 1790, Congress assigned full responsibility of census taking to the marshals of the U.S. judicial districts under an act that governed census taking through the years 1790 to 1840. It was then called the 1790 Census Act, having been signed by then President George Washington, Vice President John Adams, and the Speaker of the House, Frederick Muhlenberg, on March 1st, 1790. During this time period, there were many open political debates about who should be counted, and they also struggled with the idea of allowing indentured servants to be counted equally as the same as free whites. There was an economic structure already in place to this entire governmental construct that was not limited to taxation only, which sparked the debate with Northerners wanting slaves or indentured servants to be counted as equivalent of free whites, as the Southerners did not. Eventually, there was a compromise established, and August 2nd, 1790 marked the date of the official census day. According to the Census Bureau, the 1790 law required that, quote, every household be visited, that completed census schedules be posted in 2 of the most public places within each jurisdiction, there to remain for the inspection of all concerned, and that the aggregate amount of each description of persons for every district be transmitted to the president. Census enumerators were required to record a total of 6 inquiries in the 1790 census, calling for the names of the heads of each household and the number of persons in each household of the following descriptions: free white males 16 years and older, free white males under 16 years old, free white females, all other free, and slaves. The marshals or census enumerators were instructed to identify free white males by age brackets. It was noted that this tactic was designed to determine the country's industrial and military capabilities, and whoever refused to answer the enumerators' questions, were assessed a hefty fine of $25 at that time. Under the general direction of the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, the marshals took the census in the original 13 states, plus the districts of Kentucky, Maine, Vermont, and Tennessee. Both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson expressed skepticism over the final count, expecting a number that exceeded the 3.9 million inhabitants counted during the close of the 1790 census. So I must ask, what number did George Washington and Thomas Jefferson expect to see at the end of taking the 1790 census? Leave your comments down below and tell me what you think. And what is also important to note here is that there were various census instructions given to the census takers concerning Indians during the early 1790s and even throughout the 1800s that I want to go over with you. Starting in the 1790s, census takers were notified of instructional specifications stating, quote, omitting Indians not taxed, distinguishing free persons, including those bound to service, from all others. During the year 1800, these instructions were slightly adjusted, stating that Indians living off of reservations and not wild should be recorded in the All Other Free Persons column of the census form. The 1800 census classification options were free white, slave, and all other free persons. So we can easily determine that they have added the word persons to the already established category, all other free, which was used in the 1790 census 10 years prior. Interesting enough, the Indians living in the wild, generally meaning plains, and the Indians in the West or on reservations were not taxed, but those who were enumerated were recorded in the All Other Free column in the 1790 census. Once the Constitution called for a census of all persons excluding Indians not taxed, many other adjustments were made towards the classifications taken by the enumerators, mainly due to the sole purpose of apportioning seats in the House of Representatives and
he did cite the sources. The sources came from, first it was the racial people who was doing the scientific genetics. They were trying to save their race. This is why they said it was the survival of the fittest. The second source was when they reclassified us as Negroes. Because this is why he's explaining some were wild, some were like just free, just running around fighting, and others were captured. So this is where all this stuff is coming from.
assessing direct federal taxes. On March 2nd, 1807, then President Thomas Jefferson signed an act to prohibit the importation of slaves into any port or place with the jurisdiction of the United States. This act deemed it unlawful to, quote, import or bring into the United States or the territories thereof from any foreign kingdom, place, or country any Negro, mulatto, or person of color with intent to hold, sell, or dispose of such Negro, mulatto, or person of color as a slave, or to be held to service or labor, end quote. This act came into effect as of January 1st, 1808. Keep that in mind. These familiar terms that I just mentioned, like Negro, mulatto, and person of color, were not used as the official classifications of race on the census during this time period of 1808. In fact, just 2 years later, in 1810, there were very few adjustments made to this third census, making Indians living off of.
Have you ever heard the theory I always give? The theory was the Europeans sent over 400,000 Africans, supposedly Africans. Right now in America, they are censored that there's 40 million of us. Within those times, it doesn't make sense how they got 40 million Black Americans. The numbers does not add up. And don't forget, some people don't fill out census. So there's probably another 10 or maybe 15 million people. So you have to think about that. Where did these people come from? These people didn't come from Africa on no boat. So that's what you got to think about. Where did those people come from? Where did they come from? I couldn't tell you where they came from. I know they didn't come from no fucking mountain or anything or off the boat because only 400,000 people came over. But don't forget, there was some people that died on the trip of coming to America. And yeah, we could talk about, oh yeah, it was breeding farms and stuff like that, but don't forget, you gotta wait 9 months to have a baby. And don't forget too, some people don't live past their 20s at these times. So that's what you have to think about. Where did these people come from?
Of reservations now recorded in the All Others column of the census form. This time around, the options were free white, slave, and all other, in replacement for the 1790 and 1800 census option that read all other free and all other free persons. Soon after that, the War of 1812 made American history. It was a war declared by then President James Madison because of the discovery of Great Britain supporting many Indians with rebelling against white settlers squatting in America. This war between the United States and Great Britain lasted until the year 1815, and then 5 years later, the 1820 census made some critical adjustments to the classifications of race on their forms. This time, the Indians that were living off of reservations were recorded in the free colored persons category. Note that this is the very first time ever in history where the census utilizes the term colored. And other options included on the form were free whites, slaves, and then all others, except Indians not taxed. So, generally speaking, the phrase Indians not taxed is referring to the Indians living on reservations under the aid and care of government agencies or roaming individuals or in bands over settled tracts of the country. But need I remind you that according to the 1828 Webster's English Language Dictionary, which was 8 years after this census, the noun American is defined as a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races, found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. Then, the very next year, on March 4th, 1829, Andrew Jackson began his presidency in the White House. Then on February 22nd, 1830, Senator Hugh White proposed a bill from the Committee on Indian Affairs called the Indian Removal Act. According to the Library of Congress, the Indian Removal Act was signed into law by then President Andrew Jackson on May 28, 1830, authorizing the president to grant unsettled lands west of the Mississippi River in exchange for Indian lands within existing state borders. A few tribes were said to have left peacefully, but millions resisted the relocation policy and stayed put throughout the southern lands of America. By the 1850 census, 20 years later, another change took place, whereas the categories for race were now white, black, and mulatto. What is very important to note is that if a person looked light or mid to dark brown skin in complexion and was an Indian, the census takers recorded them as M for mulatto. According to the 1828 Webster's English Language Dictionary, mulatto is defined as, quote, a person that is the offspring of a negress by a white man or of a white woman by a Negro, end quote. According to the 8th edition of the Collins Spanish Language Dictionary, the term negress is defined as an offensive word describing a woman or girl of color, or negra, or negra, or negra.
I think most people think the census is about counting, and that's what I thought. It's really an exercise in counting before I started to do research. And I started to look back since 1790 of how we counted Americans along racial and ethnic lines. And back then it was color. And there was a controversy then, who should be counted? And should slaves who were black be counted the same as free whites? And because there's money involved and taxation involved, there was a big debate. The Northerners wanted slaves to be counted as the equivalent of free whites, and the Southerners didn't, and they agreed on a compromise that blacks, slaves, would be counted as 3/5 of a white person. So in that sense, the census not only cemented the color line, but reinforced how we thought of race, racial inequalities. And these categories have constantly changed, which is really fascinating. I was saying backstage that in 1850, we had a category mulatto to try to capture the amount of racial mixing. In 1850, we had a category mulatto to try to capture the amount of racial mixing.
But how can you capture racial mixing in 1850 when blood testing was invented during the early 1930s?
Between blacks and whites. In 1890, I believe, they added octoroon and quadroon to try to get at precise racial mixtures between blacks and whites. And then in 1930, because there was so much racial mixing, they actually dropped that altogether and just used black for anyone with any trace of black ancestry. And hence this idea of the one-drop rule.
So why is it a one-drop rule instead of being an actual proven fact?
Which has stayed so pervasive in the minds of Americans of who is black. And so as a result of all these practices, I think Americans have become very attuned to identifying blackness and constraining that racial category.
instructions for the enumerators in the 1890 census when it comes to color, sex, and age. The enumerators were instructed to be, quote, particularly careful to distinguish between blacks, mulattoes, quadroons, and octoroons. The word black should be used to describe those persons who have 3/4 or more black blood. Mulatto, those persons who have from 3/8 to 5/8 black blood. Quadroon, those persons who have 1/4 black blood. And octoroon, those persons who have 1/8 or any trace of black blood. End quote. This sounds a bit confusing to you, right? The US government created separate freedmen's lists specifically designed to rule out all copper-colored Indians from receiving any newly established benefits and land allotments that they were entitled to. The US government listed all full-blooded American Indians as black or colored as their classification of race documented inside of the 1900 census, while simultaneously, white US citizens were allowed to become identified as Indians by simply paying the Dawes Commission a whopping total of just $5 for each white adult and child to be listed on the Dawes rolls, replacing those people that were initially on the forms during this time period. So now, from the late 1880s to April 1st, 1902, which is known as April Fool's Day, public notices were passed around detailing that other claimants can legally make their cases for freedmen enrollment. However, this motion single-handedly allowed white citizens the rights to legally cede Indian lands, reparations, plus the optimized benefits having been set in stone previously for the people now classified as black. Now, jumping over to the 1930 census, it gave special instructions to the census takers, stating, quote, Negroes, persons of mixed white and Negro blood should be returned as a Negro, no matter how small the percentage of Negro blood. Both black and mulatto persons are to be returned as Negroes without distinction. A person of mixed Indian and Negro blood should be returned a Negro. Unless the Indian blood predominates and the status as an Indian is generally accepted in the community. And then it goes on to say, quote, Indians, a person of mixed white and Indian blood should be returned as Indian, except where the percentage of Indian blood is very small or where he is regarded as a white person by those in the community where he lives, end quote. So in other words, according to these enumerator instructions, whites have the power to choose whatever he or she wants to be. So if a white male or female lives amongst the Indians, then he or she can consider themselves as Indians. But if he or she just so happens to move into a predominantly white neighborhood, then he or she could consider themselves as white on the census. I'm just here to make you think.
when you look here, I'm going to click on the link. It will say creator Kelly_McAlpine. That's to my personal Instagram account. But right here, it says follow link to my
stress, for instance. American was a Black American ancestry as a black person. In other words, whether your ancestors were from America, living as original native Black American tribes, or did they come from Africa as a result of the transatlantic slave trade? Today, Black Americans are confused, and the government record prevailing system has left no stone unturned to ensure the confusion remains forever. If you ask your parents or grandparents, you might be told they are original Native Americans. But there are equal chances that you will be told that your roots lie in Africa. Which one should you believe, and which one are the real Black Americans? In this video, let's find out.
The Black History Archives.
To really decide who will be the real Black Americans, we first have to understand what makes original Native Black Americans and African Americans what they really are today. Not only that, but we have to know the major groups Black people claim to belong to really understand their identity. First, let's know who are Black Native Americans. Today, they are individuals of mixed African and Native American ancestry, often tracing their lineage back to indigenous tribes like the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Seminole. Interestingly, many Black Native Americans lived as free individuals long before slavery became institutionalized in the U.S., setting them apart from African Americans. These communities played significant roles as warriors, land defenders, and protectors of their tribal sovereignty. Their unique position in history allowed them to create a rich blend of African and Native traditions, forming distinct identities that reflected both cultures. A notable example of this is the Seminole tribe, which offered refuge to runaway slaves during the era of slavery in the U.S. These escaped individuals, known as Black Seminoles, became part of the tribe, living freely, intermarrying, and contributing to the tribe's governance and survival. The relationship between Black people and Native Americans in these communities was built on mutual cooperation and defense, rather than one of domination or servitude. But it gets interesting. That's because the Native Black Americans are themselves believed to have come from Africa. This becomes a strong argument due to the out-of-Africa theory, which suggests all humans came from Africa and migrated to different regions. However, for the sake of further explanation, let's consider the period of American colonization where Native Black people in America and those from Africa were quite different. That's when we have to know about the Black people who call themselves African Americans. They are descendants of Africans forcibly brought to America during the transatlantic slave trade. This group's history is deeply rooted in the forced migration, enslavement, and exploitation of millions of Africans. Their identity has been shaped by a continuous struggle for freedom, civil rights, and the development of a unique culture that blends African heritage with American experiences. What fundamentally distinguishes African Americans from Black Native Americans is their direct connection to the legacy of slavery and the systemic oppression that followed. Slavery stripped African Americans of their cultural and familial ties to Africa, erasing much of their heritage. Therefore, the term African American was adopted by Black communities to acknowledge both their American identity and their African roots, as highlighted by scholars. This label became a way to embrace their cultural heritage while also recognizing their complex history in the U.S. However, the landscape of black identity in America has evolved, especially since the 1960s. Immigration has brought a growing number of black people from Africa, the Caribbean, and Europe, who may not necessarily identify as African American. These first and second generation immigrants often maintain strong connections to their cultural heritage, such as being Jamaican or Nigerian, but also align with the broader black experience in America. Darian LaBeach, a Jamaican-born black man, not necessarily number of black people from Africa. 19th shape of black identity in America has evolved, especially since the 1960s. Immigration has brought a growing number of black people from Africa, the Caribbean, and Europe, who may not necessarily identify as African American. These first and second generation immigrants often maintain strong connections to their cultural heritage, such as being Jamaican or Nigerian, but also align with the broader black experience in America. Darian LaBeach, a Jamaican-born black man raised in the U.S., exemplifies this complexity. He describes his identity as fluid, with his blackness being the constant thread that ties together the different aspects of who he is. For many, the term black is more inclusive and recognizes the global diversity of the black diaspora. However, to understand the difference between the two groups further, we have to look at their cultures. Black Native Americans have a unique and rich cultural heritage that is deeply rooted in their tribal origins. Unlike African Americans, whose identity has evolved through a blend of African and American influences, Black Native Americans have preserved many of their indigenous customs, languages, and religious practices. These traditions, which have been passed down through generations, set them apart from African traditions and reflect the long-standing history of Native American life in North America. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community, and we need your support. Let's continue now. In many Black Native American communities, tribal ceremonies, spiritual practices, and governance structures remain intact. For example, tribes like the Seminole, Cherokee, and Choctaw have long-held rituals that honor the land, ancestors, and spiritual beings. Black members of these tribes have often participated in and led these ceremonies, merging their African roots with native customs. Food is another area where this cultural blend is apparent, with traditional indigenous ingredients like corn, beans, and squash being combined with African-inspired flavors and cooking techniques. Language is a key component in maintaining tribal identity among Black Native Americans. Many have preserved elements of their ancestral languages, passing them down through their families, which distinguishes them from African Americans whose languages were largely erased during slavery. Additionally, Black Native Americans often played important roles in tribal governance, making decisions about land use, trade, and diplomacy. Some even held spiritual leadership positions, serving as healers or religious figures, further solidifying their place within tribal communities. On the other hand, African Americans have developed a cultural identity shaped by survival, resilience, and the fight against systemic racism. Over centuries, African Americans have created a culture that draws from both African traditions and American experiences, leading to the birth of iconic elements like jazz, soul food, and African-inspired spiritual practices. African American culture is also deeply knotted with political activism, particularly in the fight for civil rights. The civil rights movement of the 20th century, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks, was a defining moment in American history. This legacy of activism continues today with movements like Black Lives Matter, further connecting African American identity to the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. However, both Black Native Americans and African Americans do have a shared experience. Despite their different cultural backgrounds, both Black Native Americans and African Americans have faced systemic racism and exclusion throughout U.S. history. Black Native Americans, because of their African ancestry, were often marginalized within their own tribes and faced additional discrimination from the broader society. Laws and social norms frequently stripped Black Native Americans of their tribal identity, excluding them from land ownership and participation in tribal governance. This created a complex struggle where they were seen as outsiders by the white society. African Americans, meanwhile, faced the horrors of slavery and the brutal oppression of segregation. Even after emancipation, African Americans continued to experience systemic racism through Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation and limited their access to education, housing, and voting rights. Both groups have had to endure being treated as second-class citizens, with their humanity often questioned solely because of their race. But something else happened which further faded the line of difference between the two groups. The Great Migration, which occurred from the early 1900s to the 1970s, saw millions of African Americans leaving the rural South for urban areas in the North and West, driven by the search for better economic opportunities and an escape from the oppressive Jim Crow laws. This massive movement significantly contributed to the blending of identities between Black Native Americans and African Americans, as these communities often settled in the same neighborhoods, forging new social and cultural bonds. During this time, the line between Black Native Americans and African Americans began to blur. Many African Americans claimed indigenous ancestry through oral history or family connections, though proving these ties was often challenging due to the loss or destruction of records. The erasure of documents, particularly during the forced removal of native tribes and the period of slavery, made tracing one's lineage difficult. Despite these barriers, cultural mixing was inevitable, as African and Native American traditions merged in areas like music, storytelling, and spiritual practices. However, people still had questions about their true ancestry, and that's when DNA testing became popular. Companies like Ancestry and 23andMe offer individuals the opportunity to trace their genetic heritage, and many African Americans have discovered Native American markers in their DNA. This discovery has fueled a desire to reconnect with native roots, explore tribal affiliations, and reclaim parts of their lost identity. However, DNA tests have limitations. That's because a person having a native Black American great-grandfather or grandfather may not have Native American genes. This is due to the random division of chromosomes. As a result, there is the possibility that the part of the chromosome that has Native American genes in your parents might not be selected when an egg or sperm is produced. What's more, there is a limited genetic record of the native Black Americans in the database. Therefore, even if a person has Native American genes, they are often ignored or considered African. So, after knowing this, what does it mean to be a real Black American? Well, the truth is, Black identity in America is anything but singular. It is a rich, diverse, and multifaceted experience shaped by African, indigenous, and other cultural influences. For some, being a real Black American means embracing their African heritage and the struggles of the African American experience. For others, it may mean reclaiming native roots and connecting with tribal customs and traditions. Therefore, the term real doesn't negate one experience over the other. Instead, it highlights the depth and complexity of Black American identity. Whether a person identifies more with their African lineage or their native ancestry, both are valid paths. Black American identity is an ongoing journey of self-discovery, honoring both the resilience of African Americans and the cultural legacy of Black Native Americans. It is this richness and diversity that make the Black American experience so unique and profound. What are your thoughts on your ancestry? Were your ancestors the original native Black Americans or Africans who came as a result of the transatlantic slave trade? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on whether most Black Americans today are Native Americans or African Americans. Would you like us to make more videos? Therefore, the term African American was adopted by Black communities to Therefore, the term African American was adopted by Black communities to acknowledge both their American identity. Well, most African Americans believe that the majority of their DNA has roots in Africa, while the remaining has roots in Native American tribes and Europe. This is often backed. While most African Americans believe that the majority of their DNA has roots in Africa, while the remaining has roots in Native American tribes and Europe. This is often backed by genetic studies that reveal that African Americans have 73.2% African DNA, 24% European DNA, and 0.8% Native American DNA. This makes everyone believe that they are majorly descendants of Black slaves. But what if we tell you that it's wrong? You have been intentionally told so. In fact, studies reveal that about 98% of African Americans have Native American roots. So, why were you lied to and what do they want to hide? Let's find that out in this video.
The Black History Archives.
you would have never heard that tens of millions of native black Americans, or rather Indians, used to live before Christopher Columbus came to America. However, immediately after 1492, all of them disappeared. But where did they all go? Well, many were shipped to Europe and Africa as Indian slaves. That's when we realized that the story we have been taught about the slave trade
All right,
was
I'm back.
actually backward.
Oh, sorry everybody. Y'all didn't even tell me y'all couldn't even hear me. So what I was saying is the reason why I do these type of videos is because to get a point of view on something. If you like it, do you not like it? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you like this part? Is this new to you? I didn't know this information. Oh yeah, I knew that information. You're just refreshing yourself. So yeah, definitely this is why I do these reaction videos instead of sometimes just doing a topic. So yeah. Let me keep on going, sorry.
Instead of a massive influx of Africans to America, black Indians were transported from America to Europe. From there, they were sent from Spain to Africa as commodities in exchange for African resources. These black Indians, now mistakenly identified as African Americans, were later shipped back to America and labeled as African slaves. This crucial part of our history is often neglected in school curriculums. Every European nation that colonized North America exploited Indian slaves for construction, plantations, and mining. These slaves were frequently sent to outposts in the Caribbean and Europe. Historical records, particularly those from South Carolina, the original English colony of Carolina established in 1670, provide the most authentic documentation of this practice. Between 1650 and 1730, it's estimated that at least 50,000 Indians, possibly more, were exported by the English to their Caribbean outposts. Many shipments were concealed to avoid paying government tariffs and taxes. Between 1670 and 1717, more Indians were exported than Africans were imported. Entire tribes in the southern coastal regions were decimated by slavery more than by disease or war. A law passed in 1704 conscripted Indian slaves to fight in colonial wars long before the American Revolution. Indians found themselves caught in the colonial powers' strategies for economic control. The fur trade in the Northeast, the English plantation system in the South, and the Spanish mission system in Florida all caused major disruptions to Indian communities. Displaced Indians from the fur trade in the North migrated south. Plantation owners armed them to hunt slaves living in Spanish mission communities. The French, English, and Spanish manipulated the slave trade to their advantage. They negotiated the freedom of slaves in exchange for peace, friendship, and military alliances. For instance, the British established ties with the Chickasaw in Georgia, who were surrounded by enemies. The Chickasaw conducted extensive slave raids in the lower Mississippi Valley, selling the slaves to the English to reduce Indian populations and prevent the French from arming them. Ironically, the English saw this as a more effective method of so-called civilizing them compared to the French missionaries' efforts. The Indian slave trade stretched from New Mexico, which was then Spanish territory, all the way north to the Great Lakes. Historians believe that every tribe in this vast region was involved in the slave trade, either as captives or traders. Slavery was a key part of the strategy to depopulate the land and make room for European settlers. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community, and we need your support. Let's continue now. As early as 1636, after the Pequot War in which 300 Pequots were massacred, the surviving Pequots were sold into slavery and sent to Bermuda. Major slaving ports included Boston, Salem, Mobile, and New Orleans. From these ports, Indians were shipped to Barbados by the English, to Martinique and Guadeloupe by the French, and to the Antilles by the Dutch. Indian slaves were also sent to the Bahamas, often called breaking grounds, from where they might be transported back to New York or Antigua. Historical records show that Indians were seen as poor slaves. When not shipped far from their home territories, they easily escaped and found refuge with other Indian communities. They also died in high numbers during transatlantic journeys and succumbed to European diseases. By 1676, Barbados had banned Indian slavery, citing their too bloody and dangerous an inclination to remain here. But how does it prove that most black people in America are descendants of native black Indian people? Well, as the Indian slave trade was replaced by the African slave trade by the late 1700s, Native American women began to intermarry with imported Africans. This produced mixed-race offspring whose native identities became obscured over time. The colonial project aimed to erase the presence of Indians, and these mixed-race individuals were labeled as colored people through bureaucratic changes in public records. In places like Virginia, even when individuals were recorded as Indians on birth or death certificates or other public records, these records were often changed to colored. Census takers, determining a person's race by their appearance, frequently recorded mixed-race individuals as simply black, not Indian. As a result, today there is a population of Native American heritage, particularly in the Northeast, who are not recognized by society at large. What's more, this suggests that native black Indians and black Americans of today are the same. They share similar circumstances with the freedmen of the Cherokee and other 5 civilized tribes, as documented on the Dawes Roll cards by the United States Dawes Roll Administration.
I don't know if y'all just peeped what he just said. He said, I'm gonna play it back.
By society at large. What's more, this suggests that native black Indians and black Americans of today are the same. They share similar circumstances with the freedmen of the Cherokee and other
The freedmen of the Cherokee. When you look at Cherokee land, it's all south, was it the south? Just about the almost most of the southwest. No, southeast, I'm sorry. It's Cherokee. That's how some of those people got into Mexico, because they left the Cherokee land and went to Mexico. This is why I said we got to figure out where those rest of those people came from. You can't just say everybody's from Africa, because then after that, we're doing the same thing that these motherfuckers did. These motherfuckers was just saying, yo, if you're dark, you're a Negro. So yeah, you gotta. This guy's right here is pimping game to you right now.
5 civilized tribes, as documented on the Dawes Roll cards by the United States Dawes Roll Administration. Interestingly, in early September 2015, Native American Indian tribes were awarded nearly $1 billion in a historic settlement. A total of 645 Native American tribes won settlements against the U.S. Department of Justice, amounting to $940 million. The U.S. government was fearful that more Native Indians, also known as colored, Negro, black, or simply left blank on their birth certificates, would discover their true history and heritage. This discovery could potentially force the government to grant them reparations and land. To avoid this, the U.S. quietly declared a deadline of December 31st, 2014, for these individuals to make land claims and identity claims. Even though the deadline has passed, thousands of Native Indians are still winning settlements through the U.S. Supreme Court and, more commonly, through the United Nations courts. But the question is, where did those black Indian Americans come from? Until now, it's established that most black people in America today have native black American ancestors. But we have to know who these native black Americans are. Dr. David Imhotep, a renowned historian and the first person to earn a PhD in ancient African ancestry, offers a groundbreaking perspective on human origins. He argues that all humans, including Americans, trace their roots back to Africa. This view challenges the traditional narratives in American history books, which often start with cowboys and Indians. According to Dr. Imhotep, these accounts miss a much earlier and crucial chapter of American history, the presence and influence of Africans in ancient America. In his influential book, They Came Before Columbus, historian Ivan van Sertima explores various forms of evidence supporting the idea of an African presence in the New World long before Christopher Columbus's arrival. Van Sertima examines critical aspects to build his case. He looks into the sophisticated navigation and shipbuilding techniques that ancient Africans had, which could have enabled transatlantic voyages. He also draws cultural parallels between Native Americans and Africans, highlighting similarities in art, language, and religious practices that suggest historical connections. Van Sertima further investigates the transportation of plants, animals, and textiles between the continents, arguing that these exchanges indicate contact between Africa and the Americas. Additionally, he cites diaries, journals, and oral accounts of explorers referencing African peoples and their influence in the New World. Together, these elements create a compelling picture of African exploration and settlement in the Americas well before Columbus's famous voyage in 1492. Several historical accounts support Van Sertima's thesis. One notable example is the fleet launched by the Malian Empire in 1310, comprising 200 master boats and 200 supply boats. This grand expedition highlights the advanced seafaring capabilities of West African civilizations. Another example is the sea expedition led by the Mandingo King in 1311, further demonstrating the intentional exploration efforts by African leaders. The presence and impact of black Africans in pre-Columbian America are evident in the cultural and technological imprints they left on the civilizations they encountered. In his book, The First Americans Were Africans, Dr. Imhotep expands on these themes, calling for a radical reevaluation of traditional history. He emphasizes the importance of scientific and geological evidence in tracing the early presence of African peoples in the Americas. This evidence includes genetic studies, ancient artifacts, and geological findings suggesting that Africans were present in both North and South America long before the Vikings or Columbus. One striking piece of evidence highlighted by Dr. Imhotep is a photograph from the HMS Challenger expedition, which took place between 1872 and 1876. This photograph, currently displayed at the Natural Museum of London, shows a colorful display of African explorers in Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost region of South America. This image serves as a tangible reminder of the historical presence of Africans in the Americas, further supporting Dr. Imhotep's arguments. Ultimately, this suggests that the identity of black people is too diverse to fit into a single label. They are Afro-Indigenous, Black Native, Indigenous and Black, Black and Native, or...
That shit is powerful. The reason why I say it's powerful, one second, let me make it. The reason why that's so powerful, because at the end of the day, I was just talking to SP where he said, it's hard to say that black Americans came from North America or they can be considered black natives. It technically not is. It isn't. Like, yeah, we're all from Africa. Even Latinos, they're from Africa. They're technically more African than us. Because we know that they had slaves come from Africa. We do too, but there were already people here. Like, yeah, there was natives there in that country. But were they black natives? Were they like red natives? What type of natives they were? And like this is so dope when you can go back into your history and your background to see what type of tribe you was with. Excuse me. At those times is very important because at the end of the day, you find your identity. Like, yo, let me tell you what confused the shit out of me. I'm gonna be personally honest. When Kyrie Irving was running around here talking about he was native with the red feather in his hand and his ear, and he was on some type of shit. Then after that, Kyrie Irving was more tapped in with who he was than most people. Kyrie Irving was born in Australia. Most people don't know that, but we also have to understand that Kyrie Irving was tapped into this information that he is doing now than anybody. He knew not to say, yo, we're all natives of this land. Most of this black Americans are natives of this land. They would have roasted the shit out of him if he would have said that. So he didn't. He just said, I'm native. This is my tribe right here. When shit was going on, he helped his tribe. Now I'm trying to wonder, like, damn, am I from some tribe? That's why I showed y'all a picture of my great grandparents. They don't look black Americans. They don't look African. My grandparents don't look African. So those are my grandparents. Those are my grandparents' parents. My grandparents who are 80. Almost 90 years old. That's her grandparent. That's my great Grammy Lizzie. She lived until she was 101. It's always so sweet to me. All she wanted to do was shoot guns, go fishing, and go to church.
Or black and a tribal identity. By honoring both their heritages, black people challenge America's tradition of categorizing people into distinct racial groups. They resist societal pressure to choose between their identities based on appearance or perceived authenticity. Many blend their black and native identities by using traditional language or developing new expressions that reflect their unique heritage. Since the first contact between Africans and native peoples, black and indigenous ancestors have built communities, formed relationships, and fought against systems of oppression unique to their communities as well as those that overlap. Despite the hardships faced, black and native peoples have never been conquered. They have found ways to resist oppression, creating modes of defiance such as abolition, free towns, cross-cultural alliances, kinship ties, and community building. They have pushed for freedom individually and in solidarity, birthing enduring movements of resistance. What do you think? Are black Americans descendants of black African slaves or native Indian American black people? What, in your opinion, is the reason why they hide black Americans' real ancestry? In the comments section right below, tell us whether you have had your DNA tested and know the percentage of native black Indian DNA you hold.
So those 3 documentaries were actually pretty dope. The reason why I say it was dope because most of us is actually just starting to hear that we are native to this land. Like, my grandparents is native. I know that. I was told that. Should I go back into my history? I'm gonna wait until I'm a little bit more successful than what I am to do something like that. And I think I would want to document it. I want to document it. The reason why is so I can tell my children where they came from. They know their mama's side. They came from Cambodia or Laos, or it's cool and stuff, but it's just I I'm gonna say this. I feel like the where a lot of stuff came off wrong was people telling our history, us not holding our history, and I know it was illegal for us to even know our history. This is why they always had us everywhere. They separated us and stuff like that. Like shit happens. Now we have to fix it again as always. We always have to fix something. But this is the time to fix things. I wish was it the people who usually argue about this was on right now. I mean, it was on today, but they probably busy. It's Saturday. I should have did it a little bit earlier. I know it was late, so people who are here, thank you. I do appreciate it, and I want to say thank you too. Thank y'all for watching this because I learned a lot. I hope you learned something from these three. Was it two short documentaries and one decent sized documentary? It was dope. I like it. I hope you liked it. I will do something tomorrow. I'm thinking about doing another. I might do something tomorrow. It's usually it's technically my day off of doing podcasting. Sundays is usually I usually try to do Saturday off because it's my Sabbath. But nah, I know I have to. I know I have to do something for you, and I don't mind. So yeah. But until next time, I'll see you Monday, and y'all have a great night and enjoy your